I am pleased and honored to welcome to the show a guest who's new to Crowdsource the Truth, but many, many people know Dr. Stephen Greer. Dr. Greer, welcome to the show. And we're also joined by Larry Klayman. Gentlemen, hello.
Thank
Good
you.
evening.
Glad to be with you.
Now, you guys are personal friends, and Larry has introduced me to Dr. Greer. There's an interesting thing. I've never met Dr. Greer. We've never spoken before 5 seconds ago. But Dr. Greer, we have an associate in common. I believe Chris Crescatelli produced one of the films that you've made.
He worked on Unacknowledged, which is now on Amazon Prime, along with Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind. And yes, he hosted me at Sundance back many years ago to present this issue at Sundance during the film festival.
Yep. And it's interesting because I know Chris from the world of 3D film production.
Oh, yeah.
And you are very interested in all of the dimensions that surround us. You're a fascinating guy, and I have just watched your latest film, Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind. Can you help our audience members who perhaps don't know the difference between the kinds of encounters that you can have, help everybody understand exactly what this new movie is about?
Yes, well, Close Encounter of the First Kind is when you see a UFO close enough that you can see the superstructure and the details. Close Encounter of the Second Kind is when there's physical trace evidence that it leaves, such as a landing trace, et cetera, and so on. Of course, everyone knows from Steven Spielberg's movie, Close Encounter of the Third Kind, is when you actually see an extraterrestrial biological entity, or EB. And a Close Encounter of the Fourth Kind is when somebody has an experience of being on a craft. And a fifth kind is when humans initiate the contact, sort of mutually. So Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, that's a category that we sort of put forward about 30 years ago based on some experiences I had had that deal with making direct contact with these civilizations. Keeping in mind, just to be clear, because this is all in the mainstream media now, everything that's been shown in the mainstream media up till this moment, as of this date, are actually Lockheed Martin Skunk Works, Northrop Grumman, and man-made anti-gravity vehicles. So
Wow.
there are three big lies going forward right now in the New York Times, CNN, even Fox News, etc. And those are the following. Number one, we don't know what these are. Totally false. We do know what they are. We've known for a long time. When I briefed the director of the CIA for Bill Clinton back in the 90s, and subsequently had briefed other ministers of defense and generals in the Pentagon and other officials around the world, it was made very clear to me that we have a big problem constitutionally, because we have large numbers of officials who have been basically sidelined by what some call the deep state, but the proper term is an unacknowledged special access project. And that's why we call that documentary that Chris and I worked on Unacknowledged, because that category of special access projects, which are top secret projects, the unacknowledged ones are literally off the books. If you're not read into or briefed on the project, you won't be told about it, whether you're the president of the United States or whoever. And this was something that, excuse me, I discovered back in the early 90s when I'm working full-time as an emergency and trauma doctor. That just rocked my world. I mean, oh my God, our country is in big trouble because of this level of secrecy. So the third lie, and this is, equally concerning. The first one was that we don't know what they are. We do. The second is that we don't have anything that can fly like that, when in reality, here, take a look at this. A letter from the head of the Lockheed Skunk Works, Ben Rich, most famous aerospace engineering guy in history. And he was asked by a close friend, John Anderson, are these things we're seeing man-made or extraterrestrial? And in his handwriting, Ben Rich says, John, they're both. So this is dated 1986. Now, why every anchor on CNN and editor at the New York Times doesn't know that, we have published this document in my book called Unacknowledged, which is titled after the same name as the documentary that's now on Amazon Prime. The issue is the media doesn't want to cover these facts, because the third big lie this is the biggest one, is that these are a threat to the national security. Now, why is that so dangerous? Because the people who want endless war and sort of a global totalitarian order are trying to create the next big threat. And in order to create something bigger than global terrorism or the Cold War, they're trying to launch this threat from outer space. And it is a complete, utter hoax. This is why right now we're putting the finishing touches on a brand new documentary called The Cosmic Hoax. If you go to ce5film.com, you'll see the outline for it. We're crowdfunding that also. And what's shocking about this is that we have documents and direct testimony of the fact that there is a clandestine plan to hoax a threat from outer space for reasons of essentially uniting the public, not just in America, but around the world, around sort of a totalitarian global state of endless war based on complete rubbish. And this is, in my lifetime, I turned 66 this month, this is the most dangerous thing I have ever seen in my life unfolding in the last few months.
Wow. And you've seen some dangerous things. The film Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind includes many of these encounters that you have learned to provoke. And here's what I want to say, because my own personal interest...
let me just make a comment. The actual extraterrestrial visitors, none of them are hostile. If they were, we would be terminated. It's quite clear that they're concerned, however, with our hostility, which is why the big modern era in these sightings happened when we detonated atomic and hydrogen bombs, because they realized that we were getting into deep trouble.
Wow. And I mean, certainly that type of energy signature of a nuclear blast is vastly different than anything that's happened on Earth prior to that. And it is conceivable and even logical that some species with the technological sophistication to build these type of craft would be able to detect those things. And I have to say, I do agree with your logic that if these craft had the ability to come here from distant places, they could just destroy us if they wanted to.
Oh, well, I mean, look, if you're 100,000 to several million years more advanced technologically than we are, visualize going back 200 years. I live down the road here from Thomas Jefferson's home. Imagine showing up at his house with a smartphone, or what we're doing now. It'd be witchcraft, right? So now extrapolate, go into the future, 100,000, 500,000, 1 million years. That's what we're dealing with. So their technological capabilities are so advanced that if they were actually hostile, it would have been all over the day we detonated the first atomic bomb. And here's one of the reasons why. I usually don't have time to unpack this. When you detonate an atomic or hydrogen bomb, everyone knows what an electromagnetic pulse is. Okay, that can take out all your electronic systems. It's placed at a certain altitude over, say, North America. However, there's also what has been described as a longitudinal or scalar wave that goes faster than the speed of light, that isn't a waveform like this, but is a straight line point. That's why it's called longitudinal electromagnetic wave, that disrupts trans-dimensional, other dimensions that interstellar civilizations use to go from point A to B in the universe, because they're not doing straight line travel. You can't do straight line travel. You have to go beyond the speed of light. And that opens up this whole question of what these technologies consist of. Actually, after I get this Cosmic Hoax released in the next few weeks, this documentary, my next big one, is going to be The Lost Century, talking about 100 years of clandestine suppression of technologies that, if we had them, would give us a free planet with literally free energy, which has been developed for a number of years. I mean, Nikola Tesla stumbled across it, and now we have a motor car company called Tesla, which is not a Tesla at all, because those cars are actually being plugged into a coal-fired power grid, which, P.S., we haven't needed oil, gas, coal, or nuclear power since before I was born. Now, let me give you a shocking date. One of my senior scientists, top scientists in Naval Research Labs, was inside the vault where a lot of these classified documents are kept. I mean, he used to routinely do briefings for Dick Cheney and other people in the government. And he found the document that stated that in October 1954, that we had mastered gravity control, so-called anti-gravity technologies. That is true. So many of these sightings that you're seeing that are on the news, we know are being created, manufactured by Lockheed Skunk Works, Ben Rich's old company, this letter I just held up. Why did he write that in 1986? Well, that was 30 years after we had already developed man-made UFO appearing craft. Now, are there really extraterrestrial ones? Yes, but they're both out there. And what the intelligence community are masters at doing is obfuscating and confusing the public, which is why what they're doing right now, all of a sudden people say, why is this suddenly being reported when there have been this kind of evidence for 70 years? It's because they pulled the trigger on this false flag hoaxing that's really very dangerous.
Stephen, let me ask you this question. Yeah. How did we acquire this technology? How did we get it?
Well, there are two pathways, let's call them two streams that came together in the post-World War II period. If you go back to 1920s, look up T. Townsend Brown. His work became the foundation of the RAND Corporation. He was doing, in the late 20s, high voltage experiments where things would lift and levitate, appearing to be massless. And that work was being studied and reproduced in Germany it was on the front page of a physics journal that's in the documentary Unacknowledged, called the Kalowski-Frost experiment. So this goes back to the 20s. And we were studying this in classified projects way back then. Now, at the end of World War II, we had Paul Mellon, whose grandson is on my team, Senator John Warner's son, who just passed away. His father was a contemporary of George H.W. Bush. His son's on my team, and his grandfather, Paul Mellon, one of the few billionaires within the World War II, went over to Germany at the end of World War II with Allen Dulles and General Patton and retrieved Adolf Hitler's disc. And he had an anti-gravity disc that was not perfected. It wasn't quite stable. So we brought it in along with Werner von Braun, Hermann Oberth, a lot of the really brilliant German scientists under Operation Paperclip. You can look this up, it's mainstream history, and worked on that. Now, around that time, after we had detonated the atomic bomb, there were extraterrestrial vehicles, ETVs they're called. The man-made ones are called ARVs, alien reproduction vehicles. But the ETVs were surveilling our atomic weapon sites because it was actually disrupting their cosmos by these scalar signals coming out of atomic weapons, which mainstream physicists don't talk about. However, they were of great concern to these extraterrestrial civilizations. We were able then, by 1947 at least, to develop an electromagnetic jamming system that caused 3 of these objects to crash outside the only atomic bomb squadron in the world in Roswell, New Mexico. I know it's cliche, but that actually did happen. We have multiple top secret witnesses who were there, who have gone on the record. I have documents written to J. Edgar Hoover from field agents about this, and it's in my book, Unacknowledged. Anyone who wants to check the facts. Now, the question is, what happened then? Well, those items, those extraterrestrial vehicles, began to be studied in the biggest post-World War II R&D project in history. We have a top secret document from Canada that states point blank that the research into the modus operandi of how these objects work was the most top secret operation, exceeding the development of the hydrogen bomb. Now that document is dated 1950, top secret Canadian, released officially by the Canadian government. I have it. It's been published in my book, Unacknowledged. So when you put that together, what happened is the work that had been going along apace for 20 years, from the 20s to the 40s, was then potentiated by reverse engineering and studying these extraterrestrial vehicles that we were able to capture. That became the biggest R&D project in history, although it's clandestine and unacknowledged. And that's really how we had the big breakthroughs happen by 1954. By 1954,
now, Dr. Greer, excuse me for interrupting, but this is exactly what Bob Lazar has been saying since the 1980s. I don't know. I mean, if there's,
yes, I know him. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so what do you think about Bob Lazar? Is he truthful in what he says? It sounds like what you're telling us.
Well, look, I mean, yes, he absolutely saw at the Nellis Range, is erroneously called Area 51. That's actually just a grid on the Nellis Range, a Nevada test site, it's called.
I think he refers to S4.
Well, there are several. There's S4, S9, S12, Hoot Mesa, Groom Lake. I've been there. I have people on my team who've been in the underground facility, have much more information than Bob Lazar has, frankly. He was there for a short amount of time as a young physicist. So what he saw was legitimate. Not everything that he has elaborated on the physics of those craft is accurate, but he's elaborating it to the extent that he was read into it. Remember, he was not there very long.
Right.
Now, I have people on my team. If you drill down on the 980 top secret people in the Disclosure Project, if you go back to 2001, we had several hundred at that time. At the National Press Club, we had about 22, but we had already interviewed about 300 or 400. Now we have 980 or so top secret military, aerospace, CIA people that we have interviewed and have documents and information from. So I have a vast archive on this. So Bob Lazar got a little sliver, a little piece of the mosaic. And so, yes, he absolutely did see that. Now, what he was not shown are the operational man-made ones that people on my team have seen and even piloted.
Wow.
And so, my uncle, by the way, was Northrop Grumman. My uncle worked on designing the lunar module that put the first man on the moon. So that was my mother's oldest brother, and it was Grumman, and then it became Northrop Grumman. So what you find is that there is a very long clandestine technological story here, and that's a big part of the secrecy. One big part of it is we want to preserve the element of surprise and have a false flag presenting, as Werner von Braun said on his deathbed, to present that there's an alien threat and just hoax it, that would unite the world around global fascistic militaristic interests, which of course in that kind of fear everyone gives up their freedoms, right? Remember the Patriot Act,
yeah.
The Third Reich, all they had to do is create enough fear, everyone runs scared and gives up their freedoms. So that's been part of the agenda. But the other part of it, think of the big global industrialists. If you have cracked the code of what's called zero-point energy, and that's pulling energy out of the fabric of space around you, and you have cracked the code of lifter systems, anti-gravity, boom, there goes every utility in the world, all the oil, all the gas, all the coal, all the airplanes, all the nuclear power plants, and all the roads are obsolete. Here's a shocker. All those have been obsolete since 1954 or before. And so why are we living the way we're living? It's because there are people who are very powerful industrialists, is why Eisenhower said on his last farewell address to the world, beware the military industrial complex. Now, this is a 5-star general and a Republican. He wasn't anti-military, but the reason he said that, I have people who worked with him who are on my team. I got their testimony before they died, who said that Eisenhower had been shoved aside and moved out of the briefings on these research projects in the 50s. So because he was in favor of releasing this knowledge and technology to the world that would have liberated the planet from the fascist industrial base. However, they basically told him to go jump in the lake. He was very bitter about it. And so what we have now, 60, 70 years later, 60 some years later, is a world that's a faint shadow of what it could be and should be. And the only way that's going to change is to actually do a truthful disclosure on the subject, which unfortunately I don't see forthcoming from the mainstream media.
Yeah.
Stephen, have people been killed to keep this quiet?
Oh, sure. I've had 3 people on my team assassinated. I was almost killed. Former CIA Director Bill Colby, who was going to hand off to my group an operational device, not anti-grav, but zero-point energy device that run your house and car with no energy supply and no cost. And he was also going to provide around $50 million in funding so we could get it out to the world. The week he was going to meet with a member of my board, they found him floating down the Potomac River, south of DC. So the fact of the matter is, this has been a very long and difficult journey for me since a young doctor. And, yes, I mean, lethal force has been used. Now, the other thing that's done is corruption. Back in 1992, May of 92, the head of Army Intelligence, General Major Albert Stubblebine III, General Stubblebine offered me personally $2 billion. And I'm not making this up, $2 billion to join his clique of little, goose-stepping fascists and not do what I'm doing. When I said no, he went behind my back to my wife and tried to convince her to convince me. That's a true story. Now, I said, go pound salt. I'm not interested in your money. But then when I said that, then the threats really came in full bore. So yes, very, very dangerous period in the 90s when I first started doing this. They created a lot of problems when I briefed the CIA director, R. James Woolsey, Clinton's first CIA director, had made inquiries about this issue and had been deliberately lied to. Bill Clinton was deliberately lied to.
Sorry, Dr. Greer.
Yeah, so this is a huge, complex story. Huge.
Let me stop you on James Woolsey for a second, because that guy's all over the place. Can you tell us a little bit more about how he reacted to your information?
Well, after the meeting, when this came out that the meeting happened, he denied it happened. Luckily, I have a letter that proves it did. So I always tell people, in Washington, how do you know they're lying? Their lips are moving.
Right.
If their lips are moving, they're lying.
Same expression about lawyers.
Yeah. Oh, well, no offense, but yeah, it may be true about many. Not you, Larry. But unfortunately, he was very shaken at this meeting because the document I have from his POC, his point of contact to me, is a think tank director who said, look, the president and the CIA director and their people have made inquiries into this subject and have been denied access. Now, when I got that letter in 1993, I thought, this has got to be a joke. This is like a bad John le Carre novel or something. And it turned out it was 100% true. It was shocking. I had almost a 3-hour meeting with CIA Director Woolsey and his wife. My wife was there. And he was absolutely shaken to his foundation because he and the president were being denied access. Now, later, I have found over the last 20-some years since then that when I've done, for example, it came out in a leaked memo a couple years ago about my briefing the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Tom Wilson. You can Google that memo from Dr. Davis. And in it, it describes my briefing. I took astronaut Edgar Mitchell to it. And Admiral Woolsey had the same problem that Admiral, he was also an admiral, that Admiral Wilson had. Admiral Tom Wilson, to give you an idea of what his position was, he was the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, what's called J2. He was denied access to these projects because I sent a document that's actually in the book, Unacknowledged, that listed the code names and project numbers from the early 90s from Area 51 in that area of Nellis Air Force Base. Based on that, he contacted some people and said, look, I want to be read into, which is military speak, for briefed on these projects. You know what they told him? They said, yeah, we know who you are, Admiral Wilson, but you don't have a need to know. He says, how can I not have a need to know? I'm the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And they said, sir, we will not discuss this with you. Moreover, they threatened to demote him, to take a star off his lapel.
Who are they that they can do that?
Well, this is a clandestine committee called the Majority Intelligence Committee. I know who they are. I've met with a number of them. And they view themselves as the entitled masters of the universe. And it's not just United States, it's global, frankly. And it's a very illegal, unconstitutional criminal enterprise. I mean, constitutional attorney Daniel Sheehan and I have concluded that, in fact, and he's a left-wing attorney, that this group is actually the largest racketeering, influence, corrupt organization in the world. And we can prove it. Now, fast forward a couple more years, and I'm briefing the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency. General Patrick
Flynn?
Hughes. To give you an idea, this is a 3-star
Hughes.
general. Okay, the Defense Intelligence Agency, for your viewers who may not know this, is like the CIA is civilian, but for the military intelligence, top of the food chain. This is the general who's the director. He made inquiries on this issue, and he was basically pushed aside and ridiculed. So I'm having a meeting at his conference room in the Pentagon where he literally tells me that he had also been completely pushed aside. Gordon Cooper, a very famous astronaut, Mercury astronaut, had a landing of one of these UFOs on a dry lake bed in the 50s and saw the footage and film that his crew took of it, sent it to a general at the Pentagon, and it vanished. The Secretary of Defense at the time, Cohen, asked astronaut Gordon Cooper to give him all the details on that event so he could get that footage and see it. The Secretary of Defense could never get his hands on it. It went into the black pit of Calcutta. It went into these unacknowledged special access projects. So that is how tightly wrapped these are. Now, some CIA directors have known about these programs, such as CIA Director Bush, George H.W. Bush. But certainly Dick Helms did. I know that Colby did. That's why at the end of his life, he was trying to help us. It cost him his life. But other people, if they haven't come up through the system and they won't go along with a totalitarian, fascist, global regime and do all kinds of criminal things, they won't tell them anything. So I tell you, the litmus test of whether you're going to be told or not is whether you're honest or not. If you're a stand-up guy and honest, they're not going to give you the time of day. If you're corruptible, they'll let you in little by little by little. And that's the door that opened to me in '92 from General Stubblebine when he offered me $2 billion. And I just told him, sorry, dude, you can't purchase my soul.
From the outside, let me tell you 2 quick stories here, which I've told Stephen and perhaps I've told you, Jason, but for the viewers. When I was representing Cliven Bundy, I would visit him in Pahrump Prison, which is in Area 51. And I was walking out one day and there was a security guard next to me. And I said, this is a major prison here. I was kind of joking with him. I said, it's like Alcatraz, except you have rattlesnakes. You're in the middle of the desert, And he goes, well, I'm not worried about the rattlesnakes, Mr. Klayman, but I see UFOs every night. So he was obviously seeing what you're talking about, Stephen.
Those are the man-made ones, yes.
Right. And then another quick story. There's some humor to this. Long before I met you, I filed a Freedom of Information Act request about 10 years ago. 2 years ago, I got a response. I forgot I even filed it. It comes from the Defense Intelligence Agency. It says, sorry, Mr. Klayman, that it took us 8 years. Right? What do they put in there? 4 inches of documents, all in Russian. So I give it to a friend of ours, David Marconi, and his now wife, Masha, who's Russian, and she translates it. I mean, the Russians know about this stuff. We got nothing from the Defense Intelligence Agency. Exactly what you're talking about. Not one document.
Yeah, it's a dog and pony show. And so, this month, we're going to get the Director of National Intelligence is issuing a report. It was, in the New York Times recently. And they're going to say, gee, we don't know what they are. They're not ours. Big lie. Now, why would they lie about that? Well, they don't, they don't want the public to know we have the ability to stage an alien attack. Now, this is some scary stuff because everyone's heard of alien abductions and mutilations. Jacques Vallée has stated publicly that he has a document from 1985 outlining the CIA staging alien abductions in Brazil and Argentina. We have proof of this. So people go, really? I go, yes. The kind of stagecraft and hoaxing and of psychological warfare that goes on to control the populace, they've been doing it gradually since the 50s. Now they're stepping it up. And the crown jewel of the secrecy is not only the technologies they don't want the public to know about, heaven forbid we'd have free energy and move out of the 1800s carbon-based petroleum world that the industrialist fascists want us to stay on forever. But the fact is that the surprise element, if they can convince people those objects are shown on CNN and New York Times are actually no way they can be ours, then when they start releasing in the coming months and years more and more terrifying accounts, people will be brainwashed into fear that we have to unite the world, like the movie Independence Day, against
Right.
an alien threat. Now, who benefits from that? Fascists, global totalitarians, the big industrial interests, not the American people or the people of the world for that matter. So, there is a really nasty agenda that is full of deception and lies. And there's virtually no one calling them out on this. I mean, my group is trying to say, oh, wait a minute. But every single thing that has been released in the last 2 or 3 years are a lie. Now, why did that happen? Unacknowledged, you mentioned unacknowledged, Chris Tilly worked on, that when that hit 600 to 700 million views globally,
Wow.
which it has, back in late 2017, early 18, they had Luis Elizondo and these other people who are professional disinformation people come forward starting to, quote, leak this footage. It wasn't leaked. It was a controlled release that had attached to it 2 narratives. Well, 3, actually. We don't know what they are. False. We don't have anything that flies like that. False. And they're a threat to the national security. False, except to the extent that the clandestine projects that have these technologies, they are a threat to the national security. And by the way, your viewers shouldn't take my word for that. Go look at the letter that the first director of the CIA wrote to the New York Times, where he stated the secrecy related to the UFO subject is a threat to the national security, not the UFOs, the secrecy. So this excessive secrecy Eisenhower warned us about, and the first CIA director openly wrote to the New York Times about, that is a threat to the national security, not the UFOs that are from another star system. So
Dr. Greer,
it's a complex story because everyone wants a simple, stupid answer.
Right.
I'm sorry. But the answer of this, when you're dealing with these kind of clandestine counterintelligence operations, it's never a straight line story. Larry knows that from his experience, going up against the national security state.
Sorry to interrupt you, Doctor. I just want to encourage Crowdsource the Truth viewers to check out Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, because I've just watched it today. And I mean, of course, the topic, it's easily dismissed because for so many years we've been told, oh, UFOs, there's another, conspiracy theorist. But, when you go through, as you said, it is a complex story, and you go through it, I have to say, in a really fascinating way, and you get quite deep into consciousness. A lot of people might presume that you're using technology or you've invented some kind of a machine or something like that, but you talk much more about getting in touch with your consciousness and meditation and the energy that surrounds us. It caused me to think, I think everybody has had some kind of experience. I mean, if anybody's watching right now, if you've been in love, there's that moment that you get around this person where maybe the first time you kiss them, you sort of feel this electricity all over your body that is difficult to explain. But I really liked where you were going with some of the consciousness stuff. And you're talking about industrialists now. I had this thought in my mind as I was watching your film. What are the things like this Elon Musk brain, because this touches on some of your medical background as well. I saw a demonstration that Elon Musk gave of this neural link where they had it hooked up to a pig. And they showed a readout on a computer that looked sort of like an EKG or whatever. And I mean, as you said earlier, even if you went back to 1970 with an iPhone, people would think you were a wizard of some kind. But, EKGs on the heart, we know that there's electrical impulses there. There's so little that's known about the brain. What can you say about things like this computer interface to the brain and how that affects consciousness?
Well, what Elon's working on at Neuralink is really a linear version of a non-local effect. Now, what is non-locality? You have to get into quantum physics and what's called entangled. But basically, every point in space and time is connected to every other point in space and time through what's called entanglement in quantum physics. Einstein calls it the spooky effect. We observed that the same particle was in 2 places at once at the same time. So, interestingly, when you're dealing with an interstellar civilization, their transportation and communication systems are all interfacing with this non-local, what's called transdimensional fields of energy. And the ultimate field of that It's consciousness and thought. And what am I talking about? Dr. John at Princeton, and others pioneered studies where without any wires, people could think to a random number generator, which is a sort of a quantum machine that kicks out zeros and ones. And by intending, if you think, put out more ones, it puts out more ones. And statistically provable effect with no touching, no wires, no nothing. How is that happening? It's because the field of consciousness, the field whereby you and I are awake, not what we're conscious of, not our even consciousness of our own selves, but this deeper aspect of consciousness. Some people call it the God factor or the spirit. It is actually omnipresent and unbounded by space and time. Now, what civilizations that are very advanced are doing, they have machines like what Elon Musk wants to do with Neuralink that actually interface with quanta of thought, just like our computer is interfacing with electromagnetic fields at the speed of light. These systems go at the speed of thought. Well, what's the speed of thought? It's instantaneous because of non-locality and this quantum entanglement. So look at it this way. The whole cosmos is a conscious quantum hologram where every point in space and time is connected to every other. And the most efficient field for that in terms of technological interface is the field of consciousness. And with it, thought, not random thought, but very directed, what I call coherent thought.
Well, this gets to a point, Stephen, because I know you do these gatherings, these encounters, okay? Mm-hmm. Our friend yep. David, I hope to come to one. David has our friend and Masha. And yes. You can actually, let me put it in Klayman's language or layman's language, you can actually summon these UFOs, correct? Mentally. You're communicating with them. And they show up.
I wouldn't call it summon. We're inviting contact by first going into a field of awareness that is deep, like in a meditative state, and then coherently what the CIA calls remote viewing, where you're in consciousness, you see them. And then when you see them, you then connect to them and zoom in and show them where you are, whether you're in Seattle or the desert of Arizona okay. or here in the Blue Ridge Mountains. So, and there's actually an app that we put out in the last year called CE5 Contact. And the CE5 Contact app actually trains people to do that. And now there are hundreds of thousands of people around the world doing it. When you look at the Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind documentary, and it's on Amazon Prime now and, a bunch of other sites, at Tubi or whatever. If you don't have a subscription to Amazon or something, you can see it for free on Tubi. But, there are commercials. And what you'll see is that this is something that is based on solid academic science, but it's also been kept very secret. Why? Because the power people have in human consciousness and the human spirit to come together could change the course of history. It's much more powerful than anything in the universe. And so I discovered when I was 18 years old, through a contact experience I had, that this works and you can do this. And it was the aftermath of me dying when I was 17, 6 months earlier. I got very sick, had a near-death experience, and I was raised a very devout atheist, by the way. Didn't believe in anything you could put in a test tube, and realized, wow, the human spirit soul is actually infinite and eternal, and the whole cosmos is a conscious being. And there were all these experiences I had. As an outgrowth of that, I began to have these amazing contact experiences with civilizations that use thought interface with machine. Now visualize something that looks like your smartphone that interfaces with your thought, not with an electric signal or even a wire from your brain. But what is it going at? It's not going at the speed of light, which is this radio electromagnetic field we're using right now for this computer discussion. It's using the field of consciousness with thought within it that travels at the speed of instantaneous thought. There's no time lag. This makes sense because imagine if you're from the Andromeda galaxy and there's a picture of an ET that we took from when we were at Joshua Tree National Park, that's from Andromeda. That's 2.5 million light years away. So at the speed of light, it would take 2.5 million years to say hello and another 2.5 million years for someone to say, I'm doing fine. How are you today? 5 million years. because that's the speed of light. So we know, and this was actually when I met with the CIA director, his wife was the chief operating officer of the National Academy of Sciences. And her first question was, how are they communicating or traveling between star systems and galaxies? So we got into this.
Say that again one more time, Dr. Greer. The CIA's wife was the head of the National Academy of Sciences.
Well, chief operating officer, not CEO, but the COO.
Okay.
And she, of course, had a scientific mind. I think the CIA director, this kind of went, past him. I think he was a lawyer or a policy person, whatever. But he wasn't a scientist. But at any rate, she immediately got it. She went, wow, that makes total sense, because there's no way you can use an electromagnetic signal to speed of light, or a spacecraft that goes to speed of light. It's too slow. You've got to drop out of linear space-time into these other trans-dimensional, non-local fields. And it's really quite amazing. Now, we understand how this works. By the way, one of the reasons there's an area of Area 51 called Dreamland is because when they are experimenting with these kind of technologies, it's almost like you're in a lucid astral dream, like an out-of-body experience.
And this is all, obviously, a lot of people are skeptical when you start talking about topics like this, but setting aside what anybody thinks about what you're saying, these are all things that the government has been exploring for many, many years. There was this film, The Men Who Stare at Goats, which was a true dramatization of a true situation where they had these military guys who were trying to use some of these extrasensory perception type techniques to learn things that were valuable to the government. I also want to,
it's a huge project.
Skeptics,
well, let me ask this quickly.
Let me just get this idea out real quick, because for the skeptics who are with us in the chat, I also want to relate to people that all the things that Dr. Greer is telling us about interdimensional transportation and stuff like that, this is what the fathers of quantum physics were talking about. Enrico Fermi, when he developed the particle accelerator, one of the stated purposes was to open a portal to another dimension and communicate with extraterrestrial beings, wasn't it?
Correct. Right. And remember, the father of quantum physics, of particle wave theory, Erwin Schrödinger, stated the total number of minds in the universe is one. It's a singularity. And this has been proven scientifically. When was that established? 1908. So, we're 100, and it's unfortunate that our educational system, theology, science, all of it has been, frankly, held back in the Stone Age of the 17 and 1800s. But frankly, that's where most science has been locked for reasons that are quite clear. I mean, if you look at Dr. Russell Targ, who was a laser physicist with Lockheed, he worked for 23 years under a clandestine CIA project using remote viewing consciousness to see and spy on the Soviet Union or other places. I just spent a whole half a week with a man out in Utah who for 6 years worked for the CIA using consciousness and his ability to use consciousness to see remote places to unravel code that another country was using in their encryption and signals, and he did it. So this is actually used all the time. Now, the people who want to, debunk that, they can debunk it all they want, but the science is there. The people have come forward from the government and stated emphatically, not only were they doing it, it worked very well. But here's the other point. Every single human being can be trained to do this. This is not something that you have to be some kind of, the amazing Kreskin or some nonsense. Anyone who's a conscious, awake person can do this. And that's the other thing the studies have shown, that there is no barrier to having that ability, because by virtue of being a human and being awake and conscious, you can utilize that consciousness field, which isn't limited in space-time, to see remote places, because it turns out that field of consciousness is the ultimate non-local field. It is literally omnipresent. Well, and that's why it works. And the studies that have been done academically and in the government and in Russia and the United States are replete. They're out there. But it's something that people dismiss because it's not something that is taught in your mainstream educational system.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Stephen, but when I was at Duke University, I learned of someone by the name of Dr. Rhine.
Right.
Was it Charles Rhine? Mm-hmm. Who someone had told me, maybe it was in a class or whatever, had discovered the concept of extrasensory perception. And I don't know if he did or he didn't, but the people at Duke, the academics, thought he was a heretic. They threw him off campus, and he started all these different centers off campus. And the Russians picked up on this. I mean, this is what I understood. And they were the first to actually take it to heart, and they used it for military application. And then we came along a little late, as we did with Sputnik, and picked it up. But is it possible, because there were some clinics out there.
Oh, Larry, did we lose you there?
Yeah, it looked like he snapped off.
I think he's frozen. Dr.
He's
Greer is still
frozen.
with us.
I'm
We'll
still
wait
here.
for Larry to come back. So I just wanted to ask another thing, because we've got a lot of viewers who watch Crowdsource the Truth. They're very religious, and they're concerned about this sort of interdimensional stuff. It is worth mentioning that some of these early quantum physicists and rocket scientists like Jack Parsons, they definitely were into the occult. And you spoke about Nazi scientists creating this anti-gravity technology. Well known that the Nazis had a lot of occult stuff. Even Google wants to equate your app with a Thelema app. It's brought up here, not anything to do with you, but this is Google associating that with you. Thelema, of course, very closely associated with Aleister Crowley, Jack Parsons, L. Ron Hubbard. What do you say to people who are concerned?
Those are all just the usual smear tactics. And one of the problems is to have a rational discussion about this. You really have to go back to the fact, and I like how Dr. Russell Targ discusses this. In every spiritual tradition on earth, there has been, including Christianity and Judaism, there are many accounts of these gifts, abilities, what have you. This is a normal part of the human experience. And I think that now, is there the possibility that somebody could take those abilities and use them to something not good? Yes, which is one of the things that I always emphasize. It should always be done for the common good. It should never be done selfishly. It should never be harmful. And this is why Ingo Swann, who was a very famous, quote, remote viewer that worked with the intelligence community, I got to know him. He regretted what he had done, where some of his abilities had been turned to dark purposes by the intelligence community. So I think that this gets into this deeper question of morality, where, you know, any ability you have, whether you have a thermonuclear weapon or these special abilities that are latent within every human soul, how do you use them? Do you use them for the good? Do you use them to heal? Do you use them to for enlightened purposes, or do you use them for harmful purposes? This gets into this whole question of the use of free will. And we have to then make this moral choice to do it for moral purposes. And so, you know, I like it as a doctor. I say, well, you can have a knife and you can, you know, put butter on your bread, or you can slit someone's throat. And I've seen both. All right. So the instrument in and of itself is sort of neutral. It's the consciousness of those who wield it. This is the wisdom here. So, you know, how you use any ability, tool, gift, whatever it may be, that has to do with us making conscious choices to do it for the betterment of the human species, for enlightened purposes, for positive purposes. So I would just put that as a cautionary note. Yeah.
My question was, is it possible to communicate with the dead using this mental telepathy?
I guess it's theoretically possible, but I don't know that it's particularly necessary. I think that there are all kinds, we were just talking about this, there are all kinds of abilities that are an outgrowth of understanding the structure of the cosmos. And what do you use it for? Are you going to use it for just sort of shock and awe and schlock and whatever, or are you going to use it for something constructive? I think people have to make a decision to do it for something constructive. The other problem is you need to do it in a way that can be objectively verified. When we go out and do CE5 techniques with groups, when objects appear, look at the close encounters with fifth kind. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of craft, beings, everything that have appeared. So you have to be able to verify that it's effective. Otherwise, it just gets into Ouija board nonsense. So I tell people, you know, a little bit of common sense and wisdom has to be applied when you start getting into these concepts.
I only asked that because one of the foundations off campus from Duke actually was involved with that. And this professor took us out there. So I was just curious if it was an outgrowth of this discovery.
Well,
So Larry,
I mean, he didn't
really...
discover. I just want to say that Dr. Ryan did not discover ESP. If you go back to accounts in the Bible, the ancient Vedas from India, tribal societies, you know, that capability, Aboriginals in Australia. I know a CIA State Department guy went over there and studied their what's called dream time, where while they're dreaming, they see the next day and have meetings and set up meetings. They go trekking through the outback and meet up with people that they communicated with in consciousness.
Wow.
And this has been documented. Go look it up, Dreamtime, the Aboriginals of Australia. So I think that, you know, these abilities are latent, inherent, natural within humans. The ancient Christians call them, you know, gifts. Other cultures call them other things. I don't think there's anything weird or terrible about it unless you do something weird and terrible with it. And I think this gets into this whole question of morality, as I said, and also having some kind of lodestar guidance from within yourself to do things only for the common good. And that's what I advocate to people, not to do this in a sort of a just willy-nilly childish manner. But
wow,
it's really actually very
this,
simple.
Dr. Greer? What is that?
Well,
the folded arms and everything.
I don't know that one in particular. I'd have to have it blow up and study it. But, you know, I will tell you that if you go back 5,000 years or more, there are drawings in caves of what look exactly like ET craft that we see now, with being creatures outside of them that have been carbon dated to 5,000 years old in France and India, other places around the world. So I don't think that it's anything new. I think humans have always had extraterrestrial civilizations that have observed, visited, what have you. I think the big modern era of events happened once we started unlocking the mysteries of the universe and then weaponizing them with things like hydrogen bombs. And by a little more concerning, I don't want to scare your audience, but, you know, if you look at the testimony of James Goodland, he was at the 20th anniversary of our National Press Club event we just had in April, end of April. And this guy was the last man to talk to the head of the Lockheed Skunk Works director, Ben Rich, 1 week before he died in 1996. And Ben Rich said, look, we have in the desert out near the Lockheed Skunk Works cube near Palmdale, Lancaster, up in the high desert of California, technologies beyond what you see on Star Trek and Star Wars. And we've already done it. And that's true. So James Goodall, his last name's Goodall. James Goodall went on the record and stated that absolutely to be a fact. We know this to be a fact. What's unfortunate is that if you get 5 PhDs from MIT, you're not benefiting from the trillions of dollars that have been clandestinely spent on these projects of our tax dollars. So, you know, we're sort of trying to navigate through into the future with 2 arms and a leg tied behind our back. This is why, you know, it's an existential issue that this secrecy, as the first CI director, Helen Keeter, said, is a threat to the national security and to world security. So the secrecy itself has become a threat, an extinction level threat to the human race. And that's what people need. And we're not talking about normal secrecy of, you know, a clandestine project, you know, dealing with, you know, eavesdropping on China or Russia or Iran or what have you. We're talking about projects. Remember, you know, the Secretary of Defense the day before 9/11 stated, this is on September 9th, 2001, that there were $2.3 trillion with a T unaccounted for in the Department of Defense budget. That video clip is in the documentary Unacknowledged. So, everything I'm saying, as some of it may sound pretty far out to people, is absolutely provable, fact checkable.
And I think when people watch the film, they get a better picture for the scope of what you're talking about. Even people who are maybe having a difficult time accepting it right now, I encourage them to watch the film. I think this might blow two minds in one shot. So we've got here this Aboriginal Dreamtime illustration from the website, and I don't know if you guys can see in the video share the inset that I've put of this young boy wearing a medallion that seems to be quite clearly a figure in the same position. This young boy is Barack Obama.
No, I don't know. Who knows? I'm not familiar with it. I mean, you dredge up anything off the internet. Who knows if it's real, a deep fake, or whatever,
Oh, that's really Obama, but I don't know what the Aboriginals are doing with that figure. So, Dr. Greer, what do you expect will happen next? Everybody is waiting for this big June revelation. It's so bizarre. We've gone from a world where when Larry and I interview Dr. Judy Mikovits, who tells us what she's been telling the world for 10 years, that Anthony Fauci is involved in dangerous gain-of-function research, weaponizing viruses. We've now had a total flip-flop to that no longer being a crazy conspiracy theory, but actually being accepted as fact. The same thing seems to be happening with so-called UFOs. What do you see happening in the next 30 days, 1 year, relative to all this?
Well, I think there's going to be a continued ramping up of stories in the mainstream media about this issue that are going to be tilted in the direction of it being a threat, and B, where they're going to be increasingly putting out hoaxed events that are done by clandestine, unacknowledged special access projects, which they're going to want people to think are alien. I think that people have to be extremely skeptical. It's interesting because people say, oh, Dr. Greer's, he's a medical doctor, but he's been involved with this stuff. I'm actually the biggest skeptic you'll ever talk to. I'd say 90+% of everything I have seen in books, movies, documentaries, news shows, on the internet on this subject is absolute rubbish and disinformation. And I'm not proud to say that as someone who has been trying to bring clarity to this issue, but it is. And so I think people have to be very careful. Unfortunately, as we've had people prove, the intelligence community, one of the interesting things that came out during the Pentagon Papers when Daniel Sheehan was representing the New York Times is that he saw, Project Mockingbird, but a document that listed back then, 50 years ago, 42 people who were on the payroll of the CIA, who were major national security editors on all the major media around the world. And he saw that. And I know other people who've seen that and who have told me that's the case. So unfortunately, the media is absolutely being compromised and corrupted by people who are going to only put in front of you in the mainstream media things that are a narrative that's false. Like I said, 3 big falsehoods. We don't know what they are. We do. They're extraterrestrial and man-made. Number 2, we don't have anything that moves like that. We do. We've had them since the 50s. Number 3, they're a threat to the national security. They aren't in terms of extraterrestrial, but these covert, illegal criminal operations that are unacknowledged special access projects are an existential threat to the entire world.
Wow. Well, the film is Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, and people can get it on Amazon Prime. It's actually, you can buy it for, I think, $5.99 if you have Amazon Prime, or you can watch it for free on Tubi and just watch some commercials there. I think it's a fantastic film, absolutely fascinating. And, Dr. Greer, I also want to join you on one of these CE5 events. Before we close, you several times during the film went back to a close encounter of the fifth kind that you put together in Mount Shasta, California. Why did you select that location?
Well, we go to various locations all over the world where it's private, it's beautiful, the skies are going to be clear, predictable weather. It's an area also noted of many sightings of these objects. There's historically, even back to Native American times, accounts of these objects moving in and out of the mountain, which we have actually filmed. We actually have seen it. So there are a number of places like that around the world. And so we've gone there and have had some pretty amazing close encounters of the fifth kind where we've initiated contact in those sort of locations. But to be honest with you, you can do it anywhere in the world. We have people now all over the world doing this that are having amazing encounters. I had a truck driver from Croatia who was using the CE5 contact app and was listening to it and going along with the meditation, pulled off the side of the road at night in the mountains in Croatia, and an extraterrestrial vehicle literally materialized on one side of the truck, floated over the front of it, and moved off to the right. And this is happening all over the world. It's actually a very understandable science, and it's something that everyone can actually do. Why is it important? I think because we have overly militarized and mythologized this subject, we the people need to go out there and directly make contact and investigate this for ourselves. Why should we be listening to what big government, big media tells us? Have they ever told the truth about anything important?
No.
Never.
And
never. Not in my lifetime. Yeah.
Because when I was watching the film and hearing you say all that sort of stuff, it reminded me very much of Larry's, citizen grand juries. You're sort of creating like an extraterrestrial citizens grand jury.
Right. Do it yourself,
That's right. Forget about the government. We, the people, must now rise up and do what we need to do. Forget about the government.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because really the power is with the people, and the power is in also the mass consciousness. So if one person puts their awareness on something in a consciousness studies lab, it has a certain effect. When two people that are united or love each other do it, it's an exponentially increased. So the power of love, the power of higher consciousness, this is the power that humans have if we don't give it away to, these big corrupt interests.
Wow. I have to really encourage people to check these things out. Even if you doubt what Dr. Greer is saying, evaluate the information that he's providing. Look at these videos. Look at the testimony of the various individuals. There's so many questions. I would love to have you back on, Dr. Greer. People should go to Amazon and you can get Unacknowledged. There's a film also. My friend Chris was the producer, and you're definitely going to want to check out Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind. You can watch the trailer here on YouTube. You can get the film on Amazon Prime. You can get it on Tubi. And of course, tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern, we're going to have another Citizens Grand Jury. Larry will be back with me for that. And we're going to continue to do this in the way that Dr. Greer is encouraging everyone. This is for we, the people, to do. Any last words, gentlemen, before we wrap up tonight?
I want to thank Dr. Greer for coming on. He's a very courageous person, and he's risked his life to tell the truth. We all need to rise up right now and not be afraid, because the country is living in a dictatorship. It's gotten worse. I often say, Jason, as you know, that give me King George III. He was Mother Teresa compared to the people that are running this country today.
Absolutely. Well, and the other point is that I like the name of your show. We have crowdfunded all these feature film documentaries. By the way, they're on iTunes, they're on Amazon, they're everywhere. The #1 in the world. Not a one penny of it came from corporate or big interest. It was crowdfunded by thousands of people. And right now we're still crowdfunding this new cosmic hoax expose of how they're hoaxing all this stuff. And that's crowdfunded at ce5film.com, ce5film.com. So if you go to see, you'll see we still have an active crowdfunding campaign, because everything we do is done. I left my medical career a few years ago. No one on my team gets paid. It's a labor of love. But luckily, we have so many thousands of people who are helping us. And the only way this is going to happen is people coming together, grassroots style, and working to get the truth out to everyone, person to person.
And I think it's good for people to know, if they go to ce5film.com, the various sponsorship options are going to give you gifts. So if you're interested in reading some of Dr. Greer's books, or getting the digital downloads of the various films, check out CE5 Film and click on the donate button and evaluate some of these options. Could be a great way to get your own copy of a book or the film or any of the different things that Dr. Greer has put out. And don't forget, you can support this program by going to subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth or patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. Thank you so much to my guests, Dr. Stephen Greer and Larry Klayman, of course. Gentlemen, lovely to speak with you tonight.
Thank you.
Have a great night, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow.
All right. Good night.